The night began with a sound that didn't belong to the city, three soft chimes from an antique bicycle bell, somewhere behind her, gliding through the hush like a secret that needed a witness. Aria paused under a flickering streetlight, the halo of pale gold skimming her shoulders, and for the first time in months, she realized the quiet hadn't been protecting her. It had been waiting to be broken open. The river road was a corridor of shadow and silver, water pressing itself against the banks as if it wanted to climb out and become air. Aria walked it nightly because the day made her skin too tight, the office with its spreadsheet glare, the texts from her fiancé, Daniel, that never asked how she was, only what time she'd be home, the mirrors that caught her face at angles she didn't recognize. At night, the city pretended not to know her. It let her be unnamed enough to breathe. The bell chimed again. She turned. The man coasted into view the way some people enter a room that is already theirs, pleasantly, a little amused, as if the furniture is always in the right place for them. He was older, mid-50s maybe, salt in his dark hair like the sea had left a fingerprint, tall and lean the way tension makes some men precise instead of weary. A messenger bag rode his shoulder, worn but well cared for, the leather darkened by hands that believed in repair. "Evening," he said, and the word was warm enough to crest in her. It didn't echo, it settled. "Hi." Her voice came out breathless, not from surprise, but from the sensation of being seen by a gaze that didn't ask permission and somehow didn't need to. His eyes were steady, assessing without pry, like he was measuring the space between what she said and what she meant. He braked beside her with a soft scrape of rubber. "You always stop at the third lamp." He nodded toward the one buzzing above them, the filament caged in a trembling throat of glass. "Like you're waiting to see if it will choose to live." Her mouth tilted. "It's dramatic to die in public, the lamp's deciding if it's worth the attention." "Are you?" His smile was quick, a flash that hit and retracted with precision. She should have frowned. She should have said something glib and protective. Instead, the question passed through her and lodged somewhere delicate. The river answered for her, shivering its skin. "My name is Luke," he said, as if he were offering not just a name but an instrument tuned to a single note. "Aria." "Of course it is." He rolled the bicycle forward, walking it so they moved side by side. The air had the metallic bite of impending rain, the kind that felt like a promise made gently but unwaveringly. They said nothing for several minutes. There was the brush of wind, the clack of a loose spoke, the soft thud of her boots on damp concrete. Then, at the subtle decline where the path dipped toward a patch of wild sage, a runner darted past too close, brushing Aria's arm, spinning her toward the embankment. Luke's hand shot out, fingers banding her wrist with a firm heat that traveled like current. He steadied her easily, his palm aligning her in one decisive, unhurried motion. She froze, not from shock, but from the way her body recognized something before she allowed it to have a name. The rightness of being caught, the forbidden comfort of a grip that felt like it had been imagined into existence long ago. "Careful," he said softly, but the word was already in her skin. His thumb, almost an afterthought, almost nothing, drew a slow, absent circle over the point where her pulse jumped. The circle didn't ask, it witnessed. The heat didn't flare. It insisted. She exhaled too fast. He released her slowly, like he didn't want to scare away the thing that had opened between them and was pretending to be air. They walked. The lamp behind them finally committed to brightness. In the days that followed, Luke became the kind of constant her life had never known, slipping into the river path the way a melody slips into memory. He never asked for her number. He never asked where she lived. He asked more dangerous things. "What sound makes you more honest?" he asked on a night when the fog had teeth. "Violin's tuning," she said before she understood the answer. "The beginning is always messy. It feels like permission." "What do you want to be forgiven for?" he asked when a barge groaned downstream. "For wanting more than I have." The admission tasted like metal and relief. "What do you want to be held to?" he asked when a stray cat hooked its tail around a bench post. "My word," she said, and hated that she meant it, feared it meant she was about to break it. Daniel existed like scaffolding, useful, reassuring, ugly from certain angles. He texted her a photo of the new flatware, captioned with a wedding hashtag that was supposed to make strangers care. He wanted the certainty of a life that made sense in other people's mouths. He did not notice she no longer hummed while making coffee. He did not notice she had stopped making coffee. Luke noticed everything. He noticed the night her hair was braided, tight enough to hurt. He noticed the speed at which she moved past the bridge with the padlocks. He noticed the way she went quiet when sirens cut through the park because some part of her had trained itself to be good under scrutiny. One evening, rain arrived without theater, a wash that softened the edges of the world. They took shelter under the museum's overhang, stone columns slicked with shine. The rain smelled like pavement forgiving heat. Aria's jacket dripped at the hem, a slow punctuation. "You don't wear a ring," Luke said, and it was not a question. "It's being resized," she lied so smoothly she was startled by her competence. "Who told you had to earn love by taking up less space?" he asked, voice low. She looked at him then, really looked. The lines that bracketed his mouth like parentheses around a dozen things he'd chosen not to say. The scar near his collarbone, the thin white remnant of something that might have once been violence or merely the world insisting. The rain thickened, and with it something inevitable. Luke stepped closer by an inch that felt like a cliff. She felt the heat of him like a secret only the rain was big enough to carry. He reached for her hand, not in a question, not in a taking, but in a confirmation of the way it already trembled toward him. His fingers threaded through hers, solid, warm, sure, a yes that did not apologize. "Are you going to step off the edge?" he asked, "or keep pretending the ground under you isn't already gone?" Her heart answered against her ribs. Not a beat but a knock. She thought of Daniel's calendar invitations. She thought of her mother's insistence that a good life meant never being the story, only the audience. She thought of the night sky swallowing the city's guilt and spitting it back as stars. She tightened her grip. Luke's exhale broke against her mouth as he leaned in, not fast, never fast. He kissed her like he had been waiting for the exact crack in her restraint to show itself, and now he was pouring himself into it, slow, thorough, devastatingly certain. She was held at the waist, fingers grounded and careful, as if the part of her that had learned to flinch needed proof of gentleness. The rain became a privacy screen. When he pulled back, her breath was an instrument she didn't know how to tune. He looked like a man who could outwait anything that mattered, but also like a man who understood time as a creature that sometimes needs to be chased. "You taste like a decision," he murmured. "Decisions taste like rain," she said, but only in her head. Out loud she said nothing at all because the night had slipped a scandal into her mouth. Yes, it didn't become an affair because of the kiss. It became an affair because of the silence that followed, the kind that expands inside the body and rearranges the furniture. Aria discovered that everything she touched had to be held differently now, as if the world were a fragile thing and she had been careless all along. The kettle boiled louder. The elevator took offense to her presence. Even the office printer breathed in her face like a dog that had chosen her. Luke did not text because he did not have her number. He was where he always was, within the predictable mystery of 9:17 p.m. on the River Road. Routine felt like the only moral fiction she could still afford. On the night the city hung low and moss-green with humidity, Aria brought a truth and set it between them like a bowl they were both expected to drink from. "I'm getting married in 6 weeks." It was not an apology. It wasn't a defense, either. It was a recognition. She was crossing a line that existed whether or not either of them believed in its cartography. Luke's fingers tightened on the handlebar until the leather creaked, a small sound with too much history. "Are you asking me to hold you steady while you do it?" he asked, voice even, "or asking me to pull?" Her laugh came out with a crack in it. "I don't know how to say I want something I don't recognize yet." He nodded, the kind of nod that accepted a confession without making it tidy. "Then don't say it, do it, or don't, but don't dress it up like a virtue." In the small hours, she began to keep a separate journal. The leather was soft, the pages cream and faintly gritted. She filled them not with what happened, but with the space around what happened. The way Luke's hand warmed her wrist even hours after it had left. The sliver of moon that looked like a cut that had almost healed. The new steadiness in her step as if a different gravity had found her. Daniel noticed the journal not at all. He had begun to dream in lists. Venue, confirmed. Flowers, hydrangeas, blue. Vows, borrow from that template Marissa used. The conversation was logistics impersonating intimacy. When he reached for her in bed, his hand was the hand of a reliable calendar reminder. She felt grateful for the certainty and also nauseous with it. On a night brittle with wind, they ended up on the pedestrian bridge that made tourists feel brave. Locks clung to the railing like 1,000 clenched fists, names etched with keys that had been thrown into the river theatrically. Luke stopped, resting the bike against the fence, and regarded the locks the way a surgeon regards an MRI. People want permanence, he said. They forget how often it becomes heavy. What do you want? She asked it without giving herself time to protect either of them. He slid his gaze to her, and in it was the weather of a man who had endured the thin air of altitude long enough to function there. To not lie to myself, he said, and it felt like a dare he laid between them deliberately. They walked the length of the bridge with 1,000 voyeurs welded to the rail. Halfway across, her phone buzzed. Daniel, don't be late tomorrow, tasting appointment. Bring your notebook. Luke glanced at the screen, then at her. You could hand your life a map, he said, and it would still take a shortcut you didn't intend. She wanted to tell him about the day Daniel took her to see the house, the way his voice brightened when he said, "Imagine the nursery," as if imagining were a responsible building block. She wanted to tell him about the night she spent in the hospital as a student, holding a stranger's hand as she died and realizing love isn't only the thing that lasts. It's also the courage to offer a hand even when permanence is a lie. But instead, she said what she was allowed to say. I don't know how to not hurt someone. Luke's expression shifted minutely, a small grief surfacing and submerging so quickly she might have imagined it. You don't get to abandon yourself and call it kindness, he said. They were silent to the end of the bridge and back. When they reached the center again, Luke stopped and turned to her with a precision that felt like ceremony. If you ask me to stop, I will, he said. If you ask me to wait, I won't. And if you ask me to meet you tomorrow at 10, I will come on foot and leave the bike at home. It was absurd how the third option split her open. It was ordinary, almost domestic. Yes, come at 10, come without the flourish. But there was an intimacy to it that scared her more than the kiss had. A man on foot is a man who is staying. She did not sleep. She imagined saying yes and watched her life reroute itself with a quiet that was not peace. She imagined saying no and felt her body fold in on itself like a paper animal under rain. At 9:57, she was there. At 10:01, he appeared, on foot, messenger bag slung, hair damp from a shower that must have been fast. He wore a navy sweater that made his eyes a deeper version of their usual. He looked like a man who at some point in his life had broken something and learned how to set it properly. They didn't talk for a long time. They walked as if the city had given them this one clause in a contract written by other people. You may have this hour in which to notice. The way shadows latticed the path through the ironwork. The smell of oranges from a truck unloading crates for the farmer's market. A woman laughing too loudly and apologizing to no one. In the museum garden, he reached for her again. It was no longer an accident. His hand closed around hers, and their bodies resolved something that words had kept poor. He stood close enough that she could feel the slow measure of his breathing, the ribs expanding like someone turning the volume up on a song you didn't know you loved yet. He did not kiss her. He pressed his forehead to hers, the contact intense and gentle enough to be unbearable. Tell me a true thing, he whispered. I don't want a wedding, she said, and the truth exploded into the silence like glass. He nodded. Tell him. I can't. Then tell me until the telling becomes a muscle, he said, and this was how it began. Not with urgency, but with devotion to the practice of honesty. In the days that followed, her life split into two languages. Daytime, efficient, bright, blade-sharp. Night, textured, forested, humid with confession. In one, she was the Aria people applauded for being dependable. In the other, she was unnamed and first person. She told him about her mother teaching her to cook quietly, to enjoy the art of removing herself from the story so others could be fed. She told him about the time she lied in high school and said she hated performing when she really loved the stage so she wouldn't be accused of wanting attention. She told him about the way she learned that desire was a rumor you had to deny to keep your life. He told her about a marriage that failed because they had built a cathedral to endurance and then wondered why there was no music. He told her about a son who didn't speak to him, about the apology that had to land like a letter in a locked box. He told her about the way he had learned to be gentle with things that didn't belong to him and strict with the things that did. His time, his honesty, his choices. One night, under a sky so clear it felt indecent, she reached for him first. She kissed him like the city had gone to sleep and given them permission to wake up in a way that was almost cruel. He responded with a restraint that honored the part of her that was still learning how to hold wanting without fear. His hands were careful on her waist. Her hands were not careful at all. After, she pressed her face to his neck and noticed he smelled like cedar and a hint of citrus, like someone had learned how to distill a season. "If I say I can't leave him," she murmured, "will you leave me?" "No," he said, "but I will not be a room where you come to be less honest." She breathed out something like grief and gratitude braided tight. At home, Daniel was asleep on the couch, a sports recap murmuring absolutions. She stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the rise and fall of his chest, the good man's peace he had earned by being a man who believed in keeping promises he understood. She loved him because he had never once asked her to be small. She resented him because she had learned to do it without being asked. At 2 a.m., she wrote in the secret journal, "If love is a house, then desire is a window. Tonight I stood with my palms on the glass, heat on one side and heat on the other, and understood. The window is not the betrayal. The lie is pretending the house is enough light." The storm hit on a Wednesday like it had been planning to teach the city a lesson. Rain hammered the river into submission. Branches heavy with their own stubbornness cracked and bowed. Aria stood under the bridge and watched the water muscle past, wide and brown, a living thing that had decided to stop pretending it could be contained. Luke arrived soaked, hair pasted, sweater clinging to a body that had known how to carry weight and had kept doing it anyway. He grinned, a little feral with it. I was beginning to worry the world would try to be subtle forever. They pressed close for warmth that became excuse that became intention. Steam rose from his collarbone. She kissed a drop of rain from the corner of his mouth and understood the cruelty of having a body. It records, and it demands recall. "I told him," she said, before she could lose the nerve in the distraction of his mouth. Luke stilled. He pulled back just enough to see her. "What did you tell him?" "That I can't do it." The admission burned less than she had feared. "That I don't know how to be the person he needs without leaving the person I keep finding when I'm with you." The river applauded or devoured. It was hard to tell which. Luke closed his eyes the way a tired man prays. How did he take it? He said he knew. She swallowed, remembering the calm that had almost broken her. He said he would have rather I married him and figured it out later. He said love is work and desire is weather. And then he said he wanted to be angry but he wasn't, and it hurt worse. Luke's hand cupped the back of her neck, steady. "Love is work," he said softly. "But work without music is a factory." She laughed a broken laugh and then cried without warning, tears indistinguishable from rain. He pulled her in, and the bridge became a place where sorrow could be held without translation. She breathed him in until her lungs remembered their function. Later, when the rain softened to an apology, they walked, hands intertwined, the first public declaration that they were something even if the word for it was still being negotiated. They passed a cafe with steamed windows and people touching cups like they were shoreline. Without discussing it, they went in, their soakedness a kind of communion that excused everything. At a corner table, she waited for the guilt to arrive with the coffee. When it didn't, she felt unmoored. "I thought being honest would make me feel like I broke something irreparable." "You did," Luke said gently. "The version of your life where you survive by halves." She stared at the spoon, thin and reflective, her face distorted to the point of truth. "I don't know how to be forgiven." "Then practice not asking for it from the wrong altar," he said. "Start with yourself." They became a pair that moved like a decision, not a crisis. He met her in the mornings sometimes, on foot, always on foot now, as though abandoning the bike had been a ritual. He took her to a bookshop that smelled like cinnamon and paper. He took her to a quiet square where the fountain pretended to be Rome. He took her to the edge of a warehouse district where murals exploded across brick like arguments. He did not take her to his apartment. She did not invite him into hers. It wasn't about secrecy so much as it was a devotion to the holy space of the world between them. They were building a church without walls. At work, the world kept showing up in its sensible shoes. Her boss asked for the numbers and got them. Her coworker asked if she was excited for the wedding and received a version of a smile that didn't hurt anyone. She canceled the vendors one by one, voices polite, deposits gone, a small tax paid to the god of failures. Daniel texted, "I took my things from the apartment. Thank you for telling me before we were both trapped." She read it 20 times, each time feeling the shape of grief sharpen and then blur. She typed a dozen replies and sent none. That night, Luke found her on the steps of the museum, shoes off, toes chilled by stone. He sat beside her, leaving a respectful inch that felt like 1,000 miles and a bridge. "I want to show you something," he said. He led her down a narrow street that had never needed to be important. At the end was a door with peeling paint and a bell that looked like it had been rung by hands that told the truth. Inside, a studio, high ceilings, windows too proud to be practical, canvases leaned against walls like large, tired men. The room smelled like turpentine and lemon peel. "You paint," she said, though it was not a question. "I used to, I'm learning again." He gestured to a canvas draped with cloth. "This one is a problem I can't solve." She approached, hands behind her back as if they might betray her by touching. "May I?" He nodded. She lifted the cloth. The painting was not representational. It was a field of dark blues interrupted by a single band of rust red, like a wound that had learned to be border. It made her chest go tight. "What is it?" she whispered. "A river at night," he said. "And the part of the night that insists." She reached out, this time unable to stop herself, and hovered her hand over the paint without touching. "You keep the wound honest," she said. He made a small sound, something between a laugh and a prayer, and she turned to him, their faces too close to be polite. He kissed her then, and it felt different in a room that kept their heat and offered it back. His hands were not careful now. They were reverent in a way that made care a deeper form of insistence. She learned his shoulder with her mouth. He learned her breath with his hands. The canvas watched like a witness that understood ceremony. After they lay on the floor, the wood lending their spines a version of truth. "I don't know what we're doing," she said, not as panic but as an almost joy. "We're refusing to pretend that wanting is a sin," he said. "We're trying to make a music out of it." The next morning, her phone rang before the sun found the window. Her mother, "Come home. Your father fell. He's in the hospital." Aria dressed quickly, leaving a note for Luke on the studio's table. "I will come back. Don't tidy this." In the antiseptic brightness of the hospital, time behaved like an interrogator. Her father had a hairline fracture and a heart that liked to be dramatic. Her mother performed competence like a monologue. Aria stood and sat and stood again, fetching ice chips, resisting her body's insistence on the life waiting by the river with a man who painted rivers into wounds. She texted Luke, "Emergency with family." He wrote, "Tell me where to be useful." She almost typed the room number and then remembered the way her mother's mouth made judgments without sound. She wrote instead, "Later." It was dark when she left the hospital. The city tried to leaflet her with quiet. On the river road, the third lamp flickered like it owed her something. She waited. The bell didn't come. It shouldn't have mattered. It did. A pain she hadn't planned for entered the room and sat down. On the bridge, a man waited. Not Luke, Daniel. He stood with his hands in his pockets, a posture he had perfected from years of being a person who could be counted on not to spill. He looked tired and kind and unpersuaded. "I didn't know where else you'd go," he said. The river decided not to speak. They faced each other in the middle of a sentence the city had been writing around them. Daniel's face was softer than she deserved. She hated that, which meant she loved him. "I thought I could be angry and get over it," he said, words careful as glassware. "But the truth is I was relieved for a minute. Because I don't know if I wanted to marry the version of us we made for other people." Aria exhaled. The relief hurt in a place that made her reflexively protective of it. "I wanted to be the person who could make you happy by being the person you liked to describe," she said. "But the description made me small enough to fit anywhere. I lost track of edges." He nodded, an acknowledgement that did not absolve but did not accuse. "Are you in love with him?" She considered the question the way one considers water while drowning. It matters and also doesn't. It's the only thing and also a trick. "I'm in love with myself when I'm with him," she said. "And I think I'm in love with him for how he makes that possible." Daniel smiled, and it was the gentlest violence. "Then try not to make him carry all of that. Learn how to do it alone, too." He shoved his hands deeper in his pockets, as if the cold had crept up on them both. "I came to give you this," he said, and held out a thin envelope, the deposit receipt for the venue. "I told them to keep it. Some things are meant to be lost money." She took it, because the only thing worse than refusing kindness is asking it to be something else. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once more, then looked past her shoulder. She turned. Luke stood at the end of the bridge, on foot, messenger bag across his chest, expression unreadable in the way a true thing refuses to be reduced. He had given them distance without drama. Daniel's mouth quirked. "He waits well," he said, not unkindly. "I always wondered what that looked like." He stepped aside, not as a gift, but as the result of a decision he had already made to belong to himself first. Luke approached only when it made sense to do so. He stopped short, offering Daniel a nod that was as much apology as it could be without assuming forgiveness. Daniel returned it with a neat economy. "Be good to each other," Daniel said, and left, a man not unbroken but not abandoned. Silence. Then the river remembered how to make a sound. Luke looked at Aria as if taking attendance. "You okay?" "I don't know how to be okay yet," she said, "but I know how to be honest." "Good," he said. "Honesty can be lonely. I can help you practice until it isn't." They walked in step, until the city loosened its jaw. Back at the studio, she touched the painting again without touching it. The blue field had dried into a patience she envied. The red band glowed in a new way, as if it had learned to be border and bridge. "I want to see where you live," she said. The request surprised her. It felt more intimate than the way he had pressed his mouth to the inside of her wrist. Homes have their own grammar. He hesitated long enough for her to think she had made a mistake. Then he nodded. "Okay." Luke's apartment was on the third floor of a building whose stairs punished the uncommitted. Inside, it was sparse but deliberate. A record player with a stack of jazz albums. 2 mugs that had earned their chips. Plants that looked like they were bad at giving up. A window that framed the river like proof. He poured tea with a focus that made even water serious. She walked the room, cataloging the evidence of a life made with attention. On a shelf. A photo of a boy with Luke's mouth and a disappointed haircut. On the fridge, a postcard of a painting that made hunger sophisticated. On the table, a small notebook open to a page that read, in looping hand, "Practice staying." She touched the edge of the notebook. He watched her with that quiet weather. "Your son?" she asked, nodding at the photo. "He's 23. We don't talk," he said, no flourish. "He thinks I left because something was shinier somewhere else." "I left because I stopped being able to lie." That sounds like an excuse. It is, and it's true. She set her hand over the notebook, palm flat. "I don't want to practice leaving anymore." He moved closer. The air tightened, then realized it didn't have to. He reached for her, and this time their kiss was not an answer to a question, but a promise to ask better ones. They made a language out of hands and breath and small sounds that only made sense in that room. Later, they lay in the shape of people who had learned the value of wait. In the morning, she woke to sunlight hard as advice. Luke was at the window, looking at the river as if it might say a new thing. "Come with me," he said. "I have a selfish request." They took the long way to a nursing home that smelled like lemon and old paper. In a quiet room, a woman lay small and bright-eyed, the kind of alert that knows it doesn't owe anyone performance. "Aria," Luke said softly, "this is my mother." Aria stood straighter without deciding to. The woman's gaze was unblinking and kind. "You're the one he doesn't apologize for," she said. Luke laughed, grief in it like seasoning. "She was a music teacher," he said. "She taught me that time makes cowards of us if we let it." His mother's hand was cool but intent in Aria's. "Do not make your love into a courtroom," she said. "It's a classroom. Learn or leave." On the walk back, Aria felt the world shift one notch toward something that could hold them. Not a happy ending, she didn't trust those, but a structure built from choices that didn't require someone to vanish. She wrote to Daniel that night, not to reopen the wound, but to clean its edges. She told him the truth with the kind of care that takes time even when you wish it didn't. He wrote back, "Thank you. I'm learning how to want what I actually want." It felt like the beginning of 2 people giving the future a fair chance. Weeks folded in. She kept the journal, but it moved from the drawer to the coffee table. Luke painted. Sometimes he ruined a good canvas to find a better one underneath. Sometimes he played a record and made dinner with the quiet joy of someone who had learned not to punish themselves for pleasure. She learned the names of his plants. He learned not to rearrange her books by color. They learned to be ordinary in ways that made the rest possible. One night, back at the third lamp, the filament steady and full, Luke stopped her with a hand at the small of her back. "I want us to make a rule," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You don't strike me as a rules man." "I am," he said. just only with the rules that make room for music. He took her hand, thumb settling instinctively on her pulse. No lying, even to be kind. Especially then, no leaving without saying goodbye to the room. And no pretending, she added. No pretending we are less than we are so other people can be more comfortable. He nodded, and a final one. If we cannot keep these rules, we leave before we ruin what we made. She breathed in the night that had once protected her by making her invisible and now protected her by letting her be seen. Deal, she said. He kissed her once more, the kind of kiss that feels like a signature. Not a flourish, but binding. The river sounded like applause that didn't need to be earned. The lamp, for once, did not flicker. She thought of the first night she heard the bell, a small sound that split the quiet. She thought of all the rooms that had learned to hold their voices. She thought, this is the work with music in it. They walked on, not toward an ending, but toward a practice. Two people carrying their own weight and offering hands not as rescue, but as accompaniment. The city, finally, had learned their names. But as accompaniment. The city, finally, had learned their names.